So in this final video of vendor management, we're going to do a deep dive into negotiating. More specifically, just looking at some of those frameworks and strategies and areas of negotiation that we focus on when running our physical products business. So the key point of this video is really just to review some of those core strategies and areas of negotiations with factories. So to underpin all of this, the key goal of negotiating from my perspective is really different from most people. I think most people think about negotiating as, did I get the lowest or best price? Well, that could be part of it. Ultimately, our goal is to develop the financial and operating structure that enables you to turn inventory with the minimal amount of cash and optimal return on investment. So that's really key, right? I'm actually willing to pay or sacrifice in terms of negotiating on a slightly more expensive product if I can get payment terms, if I can turn my inventory over faster, and if I can optimize my cash flow. So you've got to really look at the holistic picture here. What are the interplays between each of these variables? And while cost is part of it, it certainly isn't the be all end all. And oftentimes you've got bigger leverage points in other elements of the negotiating structure. So it's really important to realize that this isn't usually about having the lowest product costs. Again, it can be, and that might be one element, but that's not usually going to be the winning variable when you're thinking about the structure of your business with factories. So I like to think about this in terms of a negotiating flywheel, and very much like the Amazon flywheel, there's these kind of perpetual machines that if you get some of the leverage points and the variables correct, it can really create this momentum wheel that is very, very difficult for other competitors to have a chance against you. It also becomes very difficult financially for others to compete with you. So it all starts off at the top here with being able to place large and consistent orders. This is really the magic sauce with factories in China, right? They want predictability, they want economies of scale. If you can provide both of those things, everything else in this exchange becomes easy and feeds upon itself, and then it becomes this self-fulfilling machine. So if you do large consistent orders, that typically means that you're going to get better pricing from factories due to economies of scale. They're willing to, manage all the parts, the raw materials. They're able to get price breaks and able to pass those on to you. They're also willing to take lower margin if they know that the bulk macro orders are going to make up for it in terms of total margin earned for them. This is also going to enable you to get better terms. So they might be able to give you 30, 60-day payment terms, which is a massive, massive advantage when it comes to managing cash flow and turning over your cash fast. And then you might get the optimal operating structures where they're paying for long lead time parts, they're storing stuff for you, they're maybe paying for boxes, they're paying for engineering and new product development. All these things happen when you have large consistent orders. And when you get these elements in place, you're going to have a more competitive offer. If you're able to turn your cash over more, if you're able to make more margin, if you're able to get higher ROI, that typically means that you're able to order more product. You're not going to get stocked out. When you don't get stocked out, you get more sales. When you get more sales, you get more reviews, you get more market share. All this stuff then makes you place more orders consistently in a bigger size, which gives you better pricing. You get the idea, right? This thing just starts to take over when you get all these elements right. So some of the things to focus on with negotiating and really understanding a cornerstone piece of this. The better the ROI, the return on the cash that you put in, and the faster you can turn your inventory, the quicker we turn cash. So that's a really, really key point. So ROI and then how fast are your inventory turns. If you get those two things right, you're able to turn your cash quicker, which in a physical products business is king. Managing working capital is king. And then the quicker we turn cash, the more we can order consistently. The more you order consistently, the less you stock out, which means that you get more sales, you get more margin, you get the idea. And then all those things lead to better terms and structures that we can get as sellers. So this is a cornerstone. So what are some of the things that we can focus on? First of all, I think the biggest thing that you should ever think about with negotiating is not the lowest price of your product. That could be part of it. It's really the power of cash. Anything that you can do so that you have to pay later, pay less, or you can turn your cash over quicker is going to fundamentally be a better structure for your business than getting slightly higher margins in terms of lower factory costs, bar none. Think about it this way, right? Let's say that you have to borrow money in order to buy inventory. You're going to borrow money at like an 8 to 15% interest rate. So who cares if you can get a 10% reduction in cost if you're still having to front the money out? But if you have to delay payment, it's the equivalent of that 15% cost reduction because you're not able because you're not needing to front the cash to turn your inventory over the same way. So think about it in these structures, but really the power of cash, both in terms of ROI, inventory turns, is really key. Another area to recognize is that factory quality and partnership is what you should focus on most initially when you're looking at product development. We talk about this obviously in the sourcing module in depth, but frankly, if you get a good factory with a good quality product and they're in it for the long term, that is bar none going to always beat a lower cost product. There's a lot of hidden costs with crappy factories, poor quality, longer lead times, issues with logistics, and inability to negotiate. If costs change or whatever, they won't eat it. They're going to pass those costs on you. So there's all these things that if you focus on factory quality and partnership first, everything else becomes easier, even if it's not the lowest cost product. And then competitive price. So obviously price matters, right? I'm not trying to say that it's blind and it doesn't matter, but there's other elements of just the actual factory costs that play into a competitive price. One is you want predictability and stable pricing, right? It's not uncommon, especially with lower quality factories, to get these bait and switch offers, right? So they'll go near no margin, maybe even lose money in an initial order or set of orders to get your business. And then they know you're hooked once you're in with the factory, because it's incredibly difficult to switch operations to a different factory, especially if you've done things like customizations and molds. And then guess what? As soon as there's any kind of headwind with any kind of raw material costs or exchange rates or anything else like that, they're going to change the cost for you. And they're going to pass that on to you. So having a predictable, stable price is as important as having a good price. The other thing that you want to have here is a known structure where the more that you order and the more consistently you order, you're going to get better either pricing or terms. So if you don't get the exact pricing that you want in a negotiation up front, be clear that be like, hey, look, I'm willing to accept this price, but here's my expectation, and I want to get this in writing, whether it's WeChat or email or however you want to do it. But I want your commitment that in 6 months, if we're able to do XYZ volume, you're going to bring this down for me, or you're going to give me payment terms. Like whenever you don't get exactly what you want in terms of structure, always set the stage that expectations are met, they get something in return in the future. And then the other thing I would just say is just making sure that there's no intangible costs. A lot of times you might get one price and then you're paying for boxes, you're paying for customization, you're paying for molds, you're paying for storage. Anytime the wind changes direction, you have to pay the cost. I mean, these things are intangibles, but they surface ultimately oftentimes when you don't expect them. So make sure that there's no intangibles. That's as good as having a slightly more competitive price. Next is just payment terms. I think this is honestly one of the biggest things that you can do to impact the ROI, the inventory cash turns, and the cash flow position of your physical products business. If you can get 30-day terms, ideally 60-day terms, it is an absolute game changer when it comes to managing your working capital. So think about it this way, right? Let's say that we put down a 30% deposit on a $10,000 order to keep the math simple. So we pay $3,000 up front. Then it takes the factory 45 days to make it, and then it takes another 40 days to ship. So it's another 2.5 months before I get that inventory into a sellable condition in the market that I'm selling in. And I put out $3,000, and then I put out another $7,000 when it shipped. I basically have been sunk $10,000 for up to 3 months before I've even been able to sell it. And then it might take me 2, 3, 4 months to sell through that inventory. So from the upfront kind of cash outlay, it could be 4 to 7 months by the time you actually get your money back. If you can cut that by 2 months, that is absolutely huge in terms of being able to manage your working capital. You can place orders sooner, you can place bigger orders, you can avoid stockouts. And then you really aren't under this pinch where you have an inability to purchase the inventory needed to fuel the growth of your business. So whenever you can negotiate terms, it's super critical. You're typically not going to get that initially when working with the factory, but you should always be working every single order towards getting payment terms. It might take you 6 months, it might take you 12 months, it might take you 2 years. But if you have one negotiating strategy, I would continue to chip away until you get net 60 or net 30 terms on your orders. Another one is floor stock agreements. So again, there's non-direct cost-oriented structures that can really have a benefit for ROI and moving cash. One that I love is to have floor stock agreements. And what this basically means is that you get a factory to hold a certain number of inventory, typically like an MOQ or a container size. You get them to hold 30 days worth of inventory at any given time on the floor at their factory and at their warehouse. What this does is it basically takes a lead time that might be, say, 45 days, and you can place an order and have it on a boat literally within days instead of months. This is massive, right? So if you start to see fluctuations in your sales velocity, this enables you basically a buffer that doesn't require any of your cash to be able to get in front of those fluctuations. It also enables you to not have to sink costs in terms of putting a deposit down, then waiting for production to happen, etc. So whenever you can get floor stock agreements for them to house finished goods inventory in China, it's a massive benefit. You also may want them to do floor stock agreements with their sub-suppliers. So maybe there's raw materials, maybe there's parts, there's other things that you can actually have them ensure that they're doing the same thing with their vendors, such that you never have these parts or these elements of the business that make your lead time detrimental such that you stock out and aren't able to turn cash over quickly. Another one here is just long lead time parts. We kind of alluded to it there, but anytime you've got, say, a part that is, say, a 6-month long lead time and your product itself is 5 weeks, have it so that your vendor always keeps enough of those parts on so that there's always alignment with that 5-week lead time. So you never have, this long pole in the tent that delays an order because it's some part that they need to wait 4 more months on. Any long lead time part you should identify in your BOM, your bill of materials, when you're working with the factory, and you should work closely with them to ensure that they're ordering those parts. And ideally, you don't pay for those parts. I always try to work it such that they pay for long lead time parts and they keep a certain tranche available such that it never deviates from that lead time that we want, which is usually that 45-day-ish kind of time frame. Another one is component and raw material management. Again, you should really know the input materials that go into a product. There's resins, there's metals, there's things like that are commodities. You should have a deep understanding of what those are, and you should also be closely aligned with your factory to make sure that they're managing those properly. If rubber or PVC goes in your product, make sure that they've got enough so that if spikes happen or lead time changes happen, they've got those in stock. If it's component pieces, if it's plastics, if it's metals, just think about all of those component parts that feed into your business and ensure that your factory has that covered and that you're actually not having to pay to manage those fluctuations with raw materials. And then product dev and engineering is another one, right? Can be a very expensive cost when you're developing custom products, which is what we really want to do when we're sculpting differentiated offerings. But anytime you can get those product dev and hard engineering costs basically washed out of anything that you need to pay, that can be a massive benefit for cash flow. So can they pay for molds? Can they pay for half of molds? Can they pay for product development? Can they pay for sampling? All these things when you're developing products can add up, and the more that you can mitigate those, that could be much more important than a 10% lower price if you've got all these structures in place and it's not cash out. And then finally, just to put a bow on this in terms of mentality, just realize that logic wins with this, right? There's always going to be things that come up where your factory has one stance and one price and one structure they want, and you've got another, and they've got to give up something in order to kind of get you what you want, or vice versa. Whenever you've got a stalemate, always rely on logic, right? So again, understand raw material costs. If they're talking about, hey, raw material costs have gone up, we need to increase the price. Well, let's get into that. What percentage of this raw material goes into the product? Okay, and I'm looking at a commodity chart and I see that commodity's gone up 10%, but it's only 20% of the product. So why are you trying to increase the price 20%? Like, you got to do those kind of delineations just to hold feet to the fire a little bit to make sure that, hey, mathematically I can kind of prove that this doesn't make sense to increase it. Be ready and able to dive into that level of detail. Exchange rates is another one, right? Again, sometimes you'll see that prices increase, but you might have also seen that the RMB to USD exchange rate has actually benefited the supplier. Bring that up. Be like, yes, we realize that costs have gone up. However, we've noticed that when we initially kind of priced this, the RMB was 8% worse than it is now. So that's kind of basically a wash. Then use give and take examples. Say, hey, I need you to give me this, but I'm asking you to do this because this is the thing I'm giving up. I've done this a lot with freight lately, right? Freight used to be called $4,000 a container. Now it's $20,000, and they're coming at me with price increases. I'll be like, look, I need you to take this one. I need you to take the cost hit because I've already seen my costs on freight go up 5x. So we're already down. So we're taking this big hit, in fact, a bigger hit than you're taking on these raw material increases. I need you for at least the next 6 months until, shipping kind of gets back. I need you to eat this one. So use those give and takes. Let them know when you're taking it so that they're more comfortable taking a hit too. Look at long-term mapping as well. I always like to do this, right? In terms of mapping out, hey, what would it look like if we are able to keep this cost structure or these payment terms or this operating structure in place? What does it look like for us? And then what would the benefit of that be for you? So I'll give you an example. Let's say that you get the net 60 payment terms. Let's say by getting that 60 payment terms, you're able to order container sizes. So you're able to go a little bit bigger because there's less of a cash burden on your inventory. You can let them know, hey, we've stocked out X number of days under the current structure. If you give us net 60, we're going to double the order size, which you guys are going to have lower costs on. We're not going to stock out as much. Because we're not going to stock out as much, we think we're going to get this much more market share. When we get this much more market share, I'm going to be ordering from you every 6 weeks instead of every 12 weeks, and the orders are going to be bigger. So if you're able to meet me in the middle on those payment terms, we're all going to make more money and we're all going to turn over more inventory. That's a logical, compelling reason versus just asking for 60-day payment terms. So use those long-term maps as well. And then finally, look at those win-win scenarios, right? If you both have to sacrifice a little bit, but those two sacrifices build into a better outcome for both sides, those are really powerful. And those really resonate, especially with Chinese factories as they think about long-term partnership. So that's some negotiating strategies and frameworks to think about.